Welcome to ASN Automation 2025 using C++, GTKMM, all on the Debian Linux environment. I'm running the Debian operating system with the GNOME desktop, and I'm using the GNOME Classic desktop in this particular configuration. So to make sure we're on the same page, I'm on kernel 6.1. And this is a discussion of what I have been able to accomplish with the barcode scanning solution that I've been putting together. Let's take a moment to look at the relevance of C++ in the world of technology today. And so I saw this episode of the Primogen where he was talking to Ryan Dahl, who's the creator of Node.js and who's working on the Deno project. And I found that conversation very interesting. In fact, I found all these conversations interesting in that Node.js is a very capable tool for what it does in helping web developers put together quality web applications. And I've been working with Node.js for the last few months. And what gives me tremendous confidence about Node.js is the fact that it is written in C++. And so about 9 years ago, someone asked me to look at or to explain JavaScript underneath the hood and how it runs in web browsers, right? And so if you're using Google Chrome, you're going to be using the V8 engine in some form or fashion. And so I went on GitHub and I looked at the V8 engine and I went through the source code and I learned quite a few things about how JavaScript is implemented, and I thought it was very, very interesting. And so Node.js is a very productive tool, and I like the way it's put together. And some may wonder if Node.js would ever be rewritten in Rust, right? You know, anything's possible, but I think that is very implausible. And the reason why I think that's implausible is because there is a ton of C++ code that is involved in the creation of Node.js. And so converting that to Rust is doable, but it will probably be a rewrite in order to accomplish that. And so when I looked at the Node.js source code, I saw code that is among the most immaculate and shiny examples of C++ code that is out there. It's very well written, very well done, incorporates the best practices in C++ software development that we see in present times. And so it's a very, very great application of C++, and I'm glad that it is available open source for us to look at. And while we're looking at the reality of software developer skills in today's evolving technological landscape, open source, right? You know, one of the things that I wanted to do was to have a open source barcode scanning solution that would be able to endure and work over the course of time, right? And so I've been building barcode solutions for a number of years. In the past, I had significant involvement in that process. And that was setting up not only solutions that could take in the scanned result of barcodes, but also print them out on Zebra label printers. And I had all of that tied into a warehouse management system that I built, as well as work with other warehouse management systems that had pre-existed. And I found that barcode management is a very important process that, if handled correctly, is going to ensure that you have a very efficient flow in your warehouse operation. And so the question comes up, can we use AI for these things? And sure, we could use AI for these things, but as I mentioned throughout these videos, I haven't found AI useful in this process because of the nature of what I'm doing. AI isn't able to touch this, at least at this time. And I know there's been talk about AI running warehouses and operations and that sort of thing. I don't think it's going to go to the extent that they say because of one fundamental issue. Much of this AI is trained on pre-existing data from celebrities, from authors, from people all over the map, and much of this data is still in dispute and still under question. So even while we use AI, we have to realize that it may not hold up long term. Now, there are some bright spots in the world of AI. When we look at, DeepSeek, you have DeepSeek, which was announced last month, and it's a very positive development that we now have a true open source AI infrastructure that developers can learn from and use, but realize that, again, there are many questions about AI and how it's been put together. So one of the things that we want to do is be mindful of our reliance on AI, right? Because there's some reports that show that approximately 63% of software developers are using AI very extensively. What I mean by that is there are two ways to use AI right now. One is you can have it built right into your tools, and it's built in so much so that you essentially have the AI thinking for you in a large number of cases. And the AI is just sitting there thinking for you. And, that's all well and good if that's the way you roll. But, for some people, we are finding that it is diminishing their ability to think and ability to put their own solutions together, so that when the AI messes up, it becomes more difficult for them to clean up the mess. The second way to use AI, the way that I use it, I don't ever use the real-time stuff, partly because I'm not going to pay $20 a month to have AI tell me how to write code every time I write code, right? But the second way to use AI is essentially to just go to ChatGPT or DeepSeek or something like that, and just ask it a question, have an actual conversation with it, and then it goes away, and you go off and you do your thing, right? And that works okay. Just know that that also doesn't work well for software development, because in the majority of the cases when the code is real serious software, the AI in most cases can't help you with serious software. So that brings us to the software program that I've been working on, and I wanted to talk about file export. And like I did in the video leading up to this one, I want to catch you up, if you haven't been on this series, where we're at, or where we started and where we're at in this process. Let's take a moment to review the app from the start all the way to the main window. The source code is laid out in the file system according to Unix standards, Unix and Linux standards, right? So this is how it looks on the file system. And this program is written in C++, and it uses many of the best practices in C++. And it uses GTK as the way to do the user interface. And so this is the starting point for the application, and this is how the application actually is invoked, how it is bound into the operating system, right? And so what we have here is starting up the application using Gautier application, which derives from GTK application, and you'll have to read the documentation on GTKMM, which I talk about in the videos, right? But this is actually going to link you up with the operating system that you're running in. In this case, I'm running in Debian Linux, and this is what binds it. If I was running in Windows, this would bind the software application to Microsoft Windows, and then if I was running on Apple Mac OS, this would bind it to Mac OS, right? So that's how all of that works at that level, at that high, that's the high level. And so for scanning barcodes, I got, you know, this value. I got this value variable, right, or field, this value field, that whenever a barcode is scanned and it's recognized and input into the software application, it ultimately ends up here. This is where it ends up. And you may say, all of this code around it, what is that? That is so that this value can be linked up with the display on the screen. So this is part of the infrastructure, or this allows it to map into the infrastructure for listing the barcode values on the screen, right? And you know, it's just a very simple implementation, and the programming with GTK4 book or website that I made into a booklet, a PDF booklet, explains how to do things like this, right? So one of the things that I implemented the tail end of last week, and also I expanded on this week, was a configuration window. And a configuration window is basically laid out in such a way where it's going to put different options out there for the end user to change the way the barcode scanning process works. And it's a very simple but effective way to do that. And the configuration screen works with a configuration record. The configuration record has data values, right? They have default values that the main screen is going to use, the main window is going to use, right, in order to present information as well as handle the barcode or coordinate the barcode process, right? So this is all of the different variable declarations, and I have comments here that describe the nature of many of these. And so that's what this is, right? And so basically I have the declarations for my startup and my exit, and then I have a main menu, and the main menu is tied to some actions. So if you click on configure, click on import, click on export, then that's what these actions are going to do. It's going to help map that to the relevant functions, right? So then I have the actual visual layout of the screen itself. This is the main frame, so these are invisible. They're basically just lines and sections, invisible sections, where you can slot in the parts of the screen that are visible. So I have a left frame, right? And then I got an input frame. So the left frame takes care of the left-hand side of the screen. And you might say, where's the right hand? You know, don't really need a right hand, you just need to know what your left hand is, right? So then I got the barcode scroller, right, that takes care of the right hand side, right? So that takes care of the right hand side. So all of this takes care of that. And then you have your active scan. These are the barcodes that you have scanned, and you have them showing up as a list on the screen. And so that's what all of this is going to take care of. And then the actual data for that is kept in this barcode list. So this barcode list is bound to this column view described as barcodes, and each entry in the barcode list is what's called a barcode record, which I have as a barcode row. The barcode row is basically a pointer into the currently selected or actively processed barcode entry. And then I am working with signals in GTKMM, which in other technology environments you might call events. And so I got the events going, And there's the configuration window. I have a pointer to it, right? And I go extensively into this in the previous video. And so if you wanted to know more about all of this, you'd want to look at the previous video for those details. The objective of this video and the main topic today is the export of an ASN file. And we've built a software application to be able to accomplish this objective. Details. But what I wanted to focus in on today is I wanted to focus in on the actual export. So exporting the file, it starts out with this function, right, on export. So way up here I have a signal called export, and so that signal export, that's going to map us to this process where we're exporting a file. Let's see if I can get back to, that's on import. So on export, so that's going to give us the mapping to the actual export function when the export option is selected, right? So that's our starting point here in this discussion on this. Is I'm using File Chooser Native, and File Chooser Native is basically a dialog box that's going to allow us to choose which folder the exported file goes into. Then I have a signal that's going to take that selection and it's going to map it to this function here, or method, right? And so that's going to help us with all of that. And so then the next thing that we want to look at is the process of exporting. But before we do that, it probably helps to see an example of how this works in practice. All the magic in this process starts with configure and the Autotools configure script. Let's take a moment to use that to get us started on our journey. So I got this test file, right, that has about 228 serials already in it. So that's going to streamline the testing of this. I already have a build of the application, right? And so, you know, we want to go ahead and build it fresh. Let's delete all of this, open a terminal, and then we're going to do scanner v01 configure. And if you're wondering where all of that comes from, you know, scanner v01, that's the folder directory where we have all the source code. And so we just link backwards into that from this directory. So we actually build everything here so it doesn't clobber our source tree, right? And so then we just do make, and make is going to generate all of the compiled objects and then link them all together into a final program. So that's basically the way that whole process works. And when you build it fresh like that, it takes long, but if you are iterating through this and you don't clobber the whole directory just like I did, then it moves a little faster. We're going to export the file, and we're going to do it as a demo to see how this process looks in a finished program. So there's the program. We're going to look at the configure options for tab delimited, XML, EDI 856, right? So we go and import, go into the test folder where we had the serial numbers, load that. It was as if it was scanned, right? And I explained all this in great detail in the previous video. What we want to do now is we want to do an export. So we're going to go back here and we're going to put everything in this nice, clean, empty directory here, right? So when I click that, then I can go over here. There it is. And because I have it as tab separated values, I can double click, it'll open with LibreOffice. Because it's tabbed out, it maps automatically into columns and rows, right? So that's pretty cool. But most software developers, if they end up with a tab separated file, they're just going to open it straight up and they're going to process it line by line, column by column as tabs. And that's one of the beauties of it, because it's one of the easiest formats to work with and process. So you have that as an export, and then what you want to do is move the configuration to XML. So then we export that out. We're going to put that in our directory, and that generates our XML file. One of the ways I like to test the XML file, I'll just open it up with a web browser, because if it's a legit web browser, if it's a legit XML file, then it's going to open up the way it's supposed to, right? If this XML file was not properly formatted, then you get a big old error message up here, right? So that's how that would work. And so the next one we want to do is we want to do the EDI 856. So let's make sure we put it in our proper directory. And
I want you to know this will be my last guy. You are great divers, so don't leave me alone.
let's try that again. You have to make sure you change your configuration, because all it did on that last run is it just overwrote the XML file that we already generated. So now that we've made the proper selection, there's our EDI. Open that up, take a look. There it is. So pretty much straightforward XML file, and or EDI file, should I say. For some reason I'm thinking XML, but you know, I like XML. But EDI works very well. It's actually more efficient to process than XML. So it's actually a better file format, in my opinion. A far better format. Who's ready to see the C++ code to build an ASN EDI 856 file? Let's get this process started. So let's take a look at the source code for this. That's where all the magic happens. Okay, so first we start out with the file operation dialog, where we get the current folder, and then we have the directory path that we get off of that file reference. And using the file reference, we're able to use that in conjunction with the export format type that we got from the. So we go back and we use this as a visual representation. When you do the configuration, you make these changes here, right? This is the format type: tab delimited, XML, or EDI 856, right? So that's going to map to this export format type. And so toggling off of that export format type to know which type of format we're dealing with, then we're going to name the file accordingly. That's how I ended up with these different file extensions, right? I have them all as export, right? I mean, why make them all that different? Just make the file extensions different. So anyway, and then that's going to set up the proper file extension. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to actually build the file name. So we're going to combine the folder path that was selected. In this case, scanner export combined with the actual file name piece to build a file path, pass that in to a file reference. This is going to be our file reference that we're going to work with. This is the file that we're opening, that we're going to put data into, right? Because we actually have a file reference up here. This is a file reference for a folder. This is a file reference for an actual file. And so then what we want to do is we want to get an output stream, because when you look at the actual makeup of GTKMM, right? If we go into dev help and we look at what they say about the actual file system, let's see, we go into index, you go into file, you'll see that file is just the starting point for this process. And if you look at the actual derivation sequence for this, right, you'll see that file output stream comes from output stream, right? And so then the next thing that we're going to work with after that is, now you can actually just work with the file output stream directly, right? But we decided not to do that. We're going to go one more abstraction level down to a data output stream, because that's going to allow us to work directly with string data without any conversion necessary between bytes, binary, and strings. So that makes the code much more streamlined, and it also makes it much more efficient. what I do is I do query exists to determine if the file already exists, and if it does exist, right, then we're just going to replace the file. If it doesn't, then we just create the file new. And I talked about this query exist function in the previous video, and how some of the developers say that there's another approach that you can use instead of query exists that they prefer more in practice. I explained my rationale for why I decided to go this way. So one of the things that I wanted to do was originally I wanted to get the actual number of rows that I have accumulated as containers, right? So when I go and I run this, right, when we have all these containers over on this side over here, and let's just visualize that, make it more visual. All of this here, you know, I should have a variable that tells me, okay, how many of these lines do you actually have? I don't have anything that does that, so I decided that I was going to simply go ahead and just process it a different way, right? Okay, so here's what I came up with. So since I don't have anything that I can get back off of the scan barcodes that tells me how many of them I actually put into that visual list, right? Because I didn't do a data model for that. I didn't see it as necessary. Now I could set up a data model, and that would give me what I wanted to do, but that would also incur additional development time. So I decided that I could approach this a different way and still achieve the same objective. So what I decided to do is I noticed that there was a function called getRowAtIndex. And so getRowAtIndex, and again, none of this is covered in it. None of this that I talked about in the last 3 videos is covered in the Programming with GTKMM 4 book. So this is raw experience and reading technical documentation at work here, right? So that's basically how I've been going about everything. So what I wanted to do is just start getting the row number. So when I get a row, right, I return a container row at a particular position. We're going to start at position 0. And this here and this here, so line 422 and line 454, they are linked together in that in this overall loop that we're going to have, right? We're going to have a loop where, yeah, here's a loop here where based on the container row, when I continue to retrieve it, so I do that down here. So I'm doing the same thing here. So I start off the process up here, right? So let's start it off and let's see if we actually have a container row. If I have a container row, then we're going to just start into this process, and we're going to keep in a loop. As long as I keep getting back valid container rows, this loop is going to continue. So then I have my preamble data based on the data type. So if I got XML, I'm going to output an XML preamble. If I got EDI 856, I'm going to do an EDI preamble with the initial transaction records, right? And so that's what's going to make this process work seamlessly. So it all just comes together. Now for the tab delimited, we don't need a preamble because that particular tab delimited format doesn't have headers, don't need headers, right? And so what we end up with is a label being retrieved from the container row that we know is valid, because we know we populated the container with label instances. I'm doing a dynamic cast, and I know the Programming with GTKMM 4 tutorial document, and some parts of this overall reference, they have their own dynamic cast solution. I decided to use the regular STL C++ one. It works just as fine. It's very efficient. I prefer to use regular C++ facilities when possible, because that's going to make the code better evolve over time. So then once I know I got a actual row label, I know that it's valid, I'm going to check if it has a prefix or a suffix. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So when we go up here and we pull this out, this is a prefix, this is a suffix, right? Prefix, suffix. So we can detect all off of those strings, and none of it's hard-coded. It's all dynamic. So whatever the prefix and whatever the suffix is that is selected, that's going to flow into here. And then depending on if we identify that this is a prefix suffix situation, we know it's the container name, and then we can use the container name to flow that right into whatever we're building at the line level. And so that's why we're passing in the different container values in different types of formats that we're putting together, right? And so then we close it all off. We close off the documents so that they're closed properly. And then here we're going to use total items and row number for that. And so I have individual functions for the individual line types that is put together, and that's how this is put together from a file export standpoint. So now it's time to look beyond this, and notice what I did is I named the variable out. I usually don't do that, but I said let me just call this out, and I didn't do this on purpose, but I noticed that in the glib library, right, the relevant function for outputting a string is called put string. So output string, it all flows together. So anyway, so I thought that was useful, and I had a very good experience with that. But that is writing a file export for EDI 856 using C++ and GTKMM. It's been demonstrated in this discussion, and it's been looked at from a different level. So now let's take it another step further, and let's look at EDI 856, right? So let's talk about the programming with GTKMM4 PDF. Let's pay a homage to this wonderful contribution to our process, for this will be the last time that we discuss it. So the programming with GTKMM4 booklet that I was talking about is still useful. There's still good tidbits here and there, but the more I've gotten into this process of developing this, the less I've needed that. But I'm glad it's out there, because this has been very instrumental in being able to bootstrap this process. This has been better than any large language model, any AI that's out there in terms of getting started and getting things up and running. Let's look at barcodes and the proper digit to get things on the accurate course. So again, we're dealing with barcodes, and as we're talking about artificial intelligence, we are at the standpoint now today with today's technology where we're able to have the AI recognize these digits just as well as a barcode scanner. But barcode scanners are still more efficient when we're talking about human beings getting in there and actually working through different labels and different packaging and that sort of thing. And so the barcode is going to have the patterns that's going to allow you to be able to efficiently work through that, right? You got your barcode reader. That is a instrument that I've shown in earlier videos that I got a barcode reader that helps with that, right? Now, one of the things that's notable about this process, and even back when I was doing this at a more intense level, was the solution called the barcode library. These barcode libraries or barcode SDKs, they were software packages that companies sold that a software developer could integrate into their solution so that they could correctly identify barcodes and correctly print them out on labels, thermal paper, and that sort of thing. One of the things that I did when I was building these barcode solutions is I was able to build them without these barcode libraries, because I was like, hey, whatever they understood, I can understand that, and I just looked at the actual manuals for barcodes themselves from like companies like Zebra, and I just figured it out and I put it together and I made it work, right? And so barcode technology is something that when you can integrate it in without a third-party library, or let's say a proprietary third-party library, you can actually build a process that's more efficient, more streamlined, and that runs in a way that you can evolve according to the way the organization you're working with, whether it's your own manufacturing, warehouse, startup, or what have you, or some other organization, can run more efficiently over time. Barcode technology is also huge in healthcare. Healthcare is bigger than the Defense Department, bigger than all the defense spending combined in the U.S., right? And so healthcare, they use barcodes extensively. And even in the military, you have a division where there is inventory management for healthcare that's separate from inventory management for everything else, right? So, you even have barcoding in DNA sequencing, right, where you're trying to very precisely identify the different. You're trying to identify the different molecules, species, organisms, you name it, right? And so it's all about being able to really nail that down. EDI, Efficient Info Relay. So EDI is the format that I wanted to address with this, right? And barcode scanning and EDI, they work hand in hand. And EDI has been around for a good while, at least in 1970. So it's been a long time. So it's had a good amount of time to mature. Like I said before, there's this organization called X12, and they have all these data formats that people can use as standards. I didn't see an example of 856 on here, right? But, you know, and you're like, what do you mean by 856, right? You keep seeing that number. That's your ship notice manifest. So this is basically what you see when it comes down to your different warehouse management, transportation, and inventory life cycle document formats that you see out there in practical use, right? So 856 is a major one because that is the document that is used for shipping and receiving, right, at a information systems level. So companies, they communicate back and forth these files, 856 files, right, or they call ASN files. So you don't really need an example up here because the internet got all these examples. You just search for EDI 856 PDF on Google and you're going to find, here's one from Kroger. So you're going to get in a pallet of strawberries, or you're going to get a pallet, a mixture of pistachios and pomegranate juice and cans of chickpeas and maybe some asparagus, you're going to have all of that. And so this is a file format that would describe all of that, right? And Volvo Automotive is going to be all over it. Their document, these documents, they look pretty much the same. Their formatting is different here. They've had decades to work on this, and so theirs is a little bit more advanced in how they've put theirs together. And so this is what you would call the high end of an EDI format specification document, the way that it's put together here. But then, of course, IBM isn't going to be outdone by anybody. They are probably one of the main implementers back in the beginning of EDI, because EDI is going to be very prominent on mainframe systems. But, I used it in client server, or what you would call regular Windows Server systems, using Microsoft.NET and C#. And so IBM is going to have everything put together where, it's just decked out to the nines through their catalog of data formats and ways of working with that. And so, again, EDI is pretty straightforward. you got 16 columns across here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. The asterisks denote the columns, right? Or the asterisk precedes the columns. You ignored this first lane here as far as calling it a column, in that it really defines what the row is, right? In some rows, in some formats, they're going to end it with a tilde, right? Because line returns can be different depending on if you're on Windows, Unix, aka Mac OS, or just straight up Unix, or Linux. The line returns could be different. You could have an absence of line returns. Sometimes the line returns could get lost when the data is being transmitted across different systems. And so the tilde would be the final marker that would say, hey, this line has ended and it's time to go into the next line. And so every column has a definition, but you have so many variations on the same standard because each company is going to have particular preferences in how they do this sort of thing. That covers the larger themes of this process. And let's take a look ahead. And if I don't say it then, I'll say it now. Thank you. Thank you for everything. So that's pretty much the breakdown on all of this. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And again, this has been a great application to work with. And I've pretty much wrapped this up. This is it. This code is on GitHub. I have finished this program. It's a simple, straightforward program. I've built them for years, and so being able to know what it looks like, yeah, you can take this in any number of directions. There's all kinds of additional functionality you put on here, but as far as a core baseline template for doing warehouse management, inventory management, and getting started with that and building it out into a larger system, all you'd have to do is basically have your scans in place. You got everything scanned, and then once you export the data out, you don't even need a database in this program because you just have your EDI file and you can feed this into a database, right? Or you can do tab delimited and just have a different program as an agent that does that, right? Because I did a lot of my EDI work, I did it as GUIs, but I also did it as agents tied to databases. They were all working together, and agents gives you a lot more fidelity, finesse, and in-depth way of working with it. So that's it, folks. If you have any questions, chime in on the comments, and let's see what we have going on next. My friends, I have no idea if I'm going to make any more videos on this particular topic. I thoroughly enjoyed showcasing this, exploring this, and explaining the different details that I saw and that I was able to overcome in terms of the adversities and the breakthroughs that I experienced personally. I hope that you're able to share in it if this is something that you also indulge in and delve in. And I will have other videos on other technological topics, but this particular project, it is, shall we say, fully baked at this point. I will probably have one more video that looks at the styling of this, but beyond that, I'm going to move on to other things. So until then, I will catch you on the next one. Once again, thank you for tuning in to this and sharing this journey with me and looking at all the ways in which we can maximize technology using Linux as the operating system upon which to base future innovations, and C++ as the least controversial but one of the most long-term programming languages upon which you can base solutions, and to use legitimate real-world projects, not toy examples, but a real software project to showcase these possibilities as we look at how we can better utilize our computers and utilize our technologies. So I have a couple of videos that will show up here, and they are part of this series, as well as the playlist of all the videos in this series. And if you have any comments, or if not, that's cool. Feel free to share this with anyone you think is curious about how you do C++ development in Linux to build graphical user interfaces and set them up in a way where they are not so much polished, because that's going to come in the future videos. Although if you watch the video on my RSS reader from 2023 and 2024, those videos actually show a polished user interface on Linux written in C and C++. But this one is pure C++, and it's going to have a little bit more polish upcoming in the future, in the near future. And so stay tuned for that final video in this series. And once again, thank you all who have watched this and who have tuned in. And until then, like I said earlier, I will see you on the next one.